Hello, hello, hello. Today is Thursday. It is June 18th, and it's time for Let's Talk Power Live. I'm Dr. Tangi. It's exciting for me. It's a privilege and an honor for me to be here with you tonight. Welcome to our show. This is where we talk about power in education in very real, actionable, objective ways. We take it from up in the sky and bring it down to the street level where power is showing up and it is evidenced in real and practical ways. And it is exciting. It's a joy for me to be here. Before we get going, I'm going to ask you what I always ask. Have you hit the like and subscribe button? Are you a subscriber to Let's Talk Power Live? To our subscribers, I want to thank you for being part of the Let's Talk Live family. It is a joy. We appreciate you taking the time. You could be anywhere and you have said, you know what? Yes, I want to be a part of this community. For all of our folks who like to hang out in the background, I want to say thank you for viewing us. We have a large contingency of folks who are dating us, and we're having a good time dating. We're going to ask you to commit and join us, be part of the Let's Talk Live family. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button so that we know that you're part of our family. And then lastly, going to ask you to leave us a comment. If you are excited about Juneteenth, which is tomorrow, put a 1 in the chat. I remember talking about Juneteenth with our children when they were very young, and they could not believe the story of Juneteenth when we told it to them. And we spent years before it was a federal holiday. We spent years going to Juneteenth exercises, Juneteenth events. We've talked about Juneteenth in our family. If you don't know what Juneteenth is or what happened, why we celebrate Juneteenth, it is when Texas learned after President Lincoln signed his executive order for freeing the enslaved people. We had folks in Texas were finally told years after the Emancipation Proclamation that they were indeed no longer bond servants. And there's a duality to this idea of Juneteenth. We can say we want to celebrate the full emancipation of people who were brought to this country against their will. But we can also ask ourselves the question, why are we celebrating a lie? So, you can hold two tensions, in your mind at the same time. But I celebrate Juneteenth. I will actually be working tomorrow because I've got some work I need to do. What are you working on for Juneteenth? Let us know. Help us celebrate Juneteenth. Tell somebody about it who might not know. Well, folks, over the past few weeks, we have really spent a lot of time talking to lots of people. We've talked about the arts. We've talked about mathematics. We've talked about leadership development. We've had some great guests. And while all of that conversation has been going on, one thing we have lifted each week, we have lifted data that's been telling a story, a familiar story. And tonight, we're going to continue that story and we're going to ask a question about the data that we already know. But before we get there, I'm going to do what I always do. Every week, I give you the definition of power in education. People ask me all the time, Dr. Marshall, Dr. Tangi, why do you talk about power in education? Power in education is real. And instructional power is even more real. Beverly Tatum says that power is the smog in the air of every relationship. It is a filter and it is a guide. So we take the idea of power that is usually very highbrow up here in the world of education, and we bring it down front and center. And so as I do every week, I want to share our two definitions, our capital P power in education definition, and I'm going to share our instructional power definition. So here is our power definition. So, this is what power in education is all about. It is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power. The control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. So that's what we mean when we talk about power in education. It is based upon theories of how power operates. A few months back, I did a whole Did You Know series. So make sure if you're not liked and subscribed, do that first, but go check out those videos about did you know that a person in power operates in a very particular way. But here is the definition of instructional power. Instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. That's what it is. What does it mean? It means that if you're an educator, and if you've been following, you know an educator for me is one at any level whose decisions impact a child's ability to learn, access to tools and resources, or whose decisions constrain all of that. That's what it means. If you are a person who is making those decisions that allow access to a child who is not your own, or constrains it, holds it back, you are exercising your instructional power. And it is a very real thing. So, the other thing I want to remind you of, some more housekeeping, is I want to remind you to please go ahead and get our messy middle. This is our 3-part article series about middle school. Middle school is a messy place. It is marvelously messy. But I have found the reason why people don't like middle school is because they don't understand it. They don't realize what's happening in that sphere of development is biological. And so they're misreading, misdiagnosing, misunderstanding what's happening with the students. And so the Messy Middle article series is going to supply you with the backstory and the tools and resources to disrupt some of the harmful ways middle schoolers are treated. And it's going to give you some tools to ensure that as you go forward with your middle schoolers or your adolescents, you have the tools, knowledge, skills to make it less messy. There we go. Now, what am I excited about? Let me tell y'all what. If y'all were here last week, you know I had Ron Rapitello and we yucked it up. We talked about the Knicks in 5. Go Knicks. This week, I'm equally excited to bring a tremendous guest to the stage with me tonight. This is Dr. Dwayne Chism. He is the founder of Shifting Perspectives Incorporated. He is an author, Leading Your School Toward Equity, a practical framework for walking the talk of equity. He's a former college dean. He's a district leader. He is an all-around leader. Dr. Dwayne and I have been friends for 3 years, went by just like 20. Every time we get together, it is a fantastic time. It gives me joy. It gives me pleasure. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Dwayne Chism to Let's Talk Power Live. Dr. Dwayne, hey.
Hey.
I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you. And here's the other thing. You know how you got friends, right? Where you can call them up last minute. And I was like, Dwayne, what you doing on Thursday? You want to be on Let's Talk Power Live? He's like, I'm going to be there. So here he is. He is a dear friend. We talk about education in so many ways, and it has been a joy to meet him, to know him, and I know that he is impacting the world for the good of children. So Dwayne, let our members know who you are and what you do.
Well, you know what? You did such a good introduction. Basically, I'm a lifelong learner. I feel like I've been an educator since jump, right? And I think my main function right now is to continue to make sure each kid gets what they need and what they deserve. So I've been, like you said, I've been a college dean. I've seen it from the higher ed perspective. I've seen it as a district leader, as a principal supervisor. And so just really excited to be a part of this conversation and talk about power. Mm-hmm. Because the more I've looked at just your work and what I've seen out in schools, it is so critical to help people understand the power they actually possess to make a change and make a difference. So I feel like I've been on this power journey along with you, just trying to make sure that everybody understands that it's time for change and we can do better.
Absolutely, right? We keep, and the topic for tonight's show really is, why do the student outcomes that nobody wants, why do they persist? And before we tackle that question, because here's some things we need to talk about, let's talk about some of the data that we know. Like, we already know these outcomes, right? The achievement gaps persist. We know that. Performance differences across race, income, language, and disability remains stubbornly consistent. Discipline disparities persist. Black students, students with disabilities, and multilingual learners continue to experience disproportionate disciplinary consequences. And then chronic absenteeism remains elevated. Attendance has improved, but absenteeism remains well above pre-pandemic levels in many communities. So we know these things.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they persist?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is we continue to put comfort over candor.
Ooh.
I think, often in too many systems, we're still using kind of that streetlight approach to looking at data, right? We're looking only where it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I like to think about when I talk to and work with schools is that something has to happen in order for there to be transformational change. And the first thing is we have to be talking about the right things. Because if we're not talking about the right things, we can't get access to the right information to make the needed and necessary change. So I would say we have to start with the types of conversations that we're willing to have or not willing to have, because we can't change what we're not willing to address and look at critically.
Right. And that's what James Baldwin says. Not
Yes.
everything can be changed, but nothing, basically, if you don't face it, nothing can get changed. And I love that streetlight approach, right? Like, we only talk about the places that are quote unquote lit up, and we don't want to really have the hard questions that we need to have to dispel what we know is going on. So here's the next set of that information that we talked about. Access remains uneven. Students continue to experience different levels of access to advanced coursework, experienced teachers, and achievement opportunities. So that real uneven access to an excellent education that every kid deserves is uneven. Belonging and engagement differ. Students report different experiences of connection, voice, and support within the same schools. What most people don't understand is schools are more variant inside the schools than they are between schools. It takes me back to my own classroom where myself and my colleague across the hall, we both taught honors English, but they couldn't have been more different, right? And then effective learning conditions differ. Students experience different levels of rigor, support, and instructional quality. What is going on?
Well, I tell you what, we can't continue to build schools on good intentions.
Yeah, that road to hell. That road to hell is paved with them.
Yeah, I think the problem is we have a lot of well-intended people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, and I go back to this notion of power and agency and voice.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes we're coming up with prescriptions and prescribing things, but we don't always have the voice of the voiceless, and we don't really understand what their true plight is and what their true experience is to make sure that it matches what we think needs to be done.
Right.
And so I think part of this process is that you also have to understand that part of your power is also to give it away. So who can we actually give power to that could help us better inform our system and do things that actually make a difference for each of our kids?
Right. And how do we, this idea of giving power to, I was just reading an article earlier today on student agency, where the American Institute for Research, AIR, did a study back in 2018 where they were looking at voice and power and those dynamics, right? And they said one of the ways that teachers try to get to student agency and voice is through building relationships. But they also found that they don't spend equal amounts of time looking at agency through academics. So it's basically on the social, emotional side. But I'm like, well, if you're building relationships, you're not talking about education, about the academics.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about Saturday morning. Can we talk about the Tuesday test that's coming? Can we discuss both of those? But this idea of the evenness is something I know you have seen in your work. So, as a former dean and a principal, a building leader, and then a principal coach, what do you think is accounting for this ongoing academic access unevenness?
I think we're not spending enough time reflecting on our actual impact.
Mm,
I think so. I was actually at a school site and coaching and working with a teacher, and she was talking about the improvement that this student had made. And I asked her a question that just stumped her, and I was kind of surprised that it stumped her. And I asked her, what moves did you make or what did you do differently to have that type of impact? She had thought about it all from the student lens, but never thought about there are actions that she actually did that helped that student get that outcome.
right.
So I think part of the issue is we have to become really critical and understanding that the moves that we make and the things that we do, is it giving us the return on investment in the way that we need it to? Is it actually moving us towards that North Star? And I don't know that we spend enough time
Right.
in taking a look at the practices that we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So in your book, one of the things you really talk about, which I really appreciate, is this idea of leading for equity, right? And you have this really rich pre-assessment, which I think is an important idea because as both of us have talked about it,
Yeah.
we talk about agency, we talk about equity, and in this day and age, you can't talk about equity, but we're going to talk about equity anyway because equity is power. My wondering is how do we pave the way? And how did you find using your pre assessment useful in helping these schools really understand that they need to walk the talk that they are letting come out of their mouths?
Yeah, I think the important part about the assessment is I think you get people on different continuums when they hear about equity work. Either they go full-fledged all in before people. So I think you always have to step back and understand your context.
Right.
Like the work needs to be done, the work's important, but I think you also have to understand different people are on different parts of a continuum. But you got to be on the bus, right? So I think part of when you think about this equity work, what people have to continue to do is one, never close down the conversations.
Okay.
Like I always talk about, silence actually breeds inequity. So
It
like
certainly does.
so
Right.
not talking actually contributes to the problem. So even when people tell me that I'm not ready, I'm like, well, it's not about being quote unquote ready. It's about figuring out the appropriate way to be engaged in the conversation.
Right.
But not doing anything is never an option.
Never an option because you're right. That silence, if you're silent about that issue, either you are really leaning into your own comfort because you don't want to be uncomfortable, right? That sort of discomfort. You talk about that as well in your book. But you're really keeping inequity on the playing field.
That's right.
Right? Because you're not going to talk about what you need to talk about. So you're going to keep the inequitable practices, that inequitable mindset going. It reminds me of the work that we do on our side is about building student agency. People think that, as long as I give them some options and I invite them to student council, then I have student agency. Well, that's not student agency, right? If I'm the one managing all the choices, then what are we talking about? Right. Those are my choices, right? When do we get to the point at which kids are going to make their own choice, separate and apart from me? But your idea of let's assess where we are and break that silence, right? And then you talk about this idea of discomfort. You want people to lean into that. Talk about that.
So I used to talk about it in this way. I want people to be comfortably uncomfortable. Which means there has to be a little bit of tension when we do this work, right? If the work is meaningful, it's not going to be stress-free. So I think part of what I talk about is we have to get out of this place of morale protection, where it's all about, I don't want to lose the culture. I don't want people to burn out. But what we actually are doing, what you permit is what you promote. So
yes, it is.
We're actually promoting strategies that are actually widening gaps for kids versus eliminating them and shrinking shrinking the margin. So our unwillingness to have a conversation is actually doing a disservice to our kids. So if we're going to sit back and say all kids matter or each kid matters, then we got to have a conversation that impacts each kid.
Yeah. And do we even know this idea of each? I mean, we're really good in education about language, like, you know what I mean? Even though we're not all English language arts teachers, we're very good with our words.
That's right.
Right? We say the right things, we know the right things, but we keep getting these predicted outcomes. And I wonder if these predictive outcomes are indeed based not on what people say they believe, but on what they actually believe. And what is the power dynamic in the gap between what you say you believe and what you actually believe?
You know what I think Kafele talks about is that knowing doing gap.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about all these things that we know we should do, but then there's this actual reality. And I'm a firm believer that your actions are a sign of your belief.
Aren't they?
They are a sign of your
That's
belief.
what you believe, right? Because you're doing
what you believe.
That's right.
And I think too often we are still in this position of playing gatekeepers for kids. And we are shutting down their access and opportunity based upon what we think their ability is and what it is. So in my book, I actually talk about it. I think many of our kids of color experience a belief gap.
Yeah.
So I think there's a gap in what people actually believe in their abilities and how they can move forward. And so we have to begin to look at what that paradigm shift needs to be around, and also how we see our own ability to impact and their lives and what they can do.
Yeah. And this idea of I'm going to protect, like, I'm thinking back to what you said about silence. Silence is a mode of power protecting.
That's right.
Because if I'm quiet, then I'm not going to be exposed, and I protect my own space, my own intellect, my own lack of knowledge. I'm going to be protecting all of that, all those spaces. And it creates disenfranchising for kids because, like you said, we are leaning into this morale space, right? I had a colleague of mine who's building she's building a strategic plan for a client of hers, right? And she, sometimes you don't find good stuff, right? You just don't got good stuff to say. But the leader that she's presenting a document to was like, no, I really want to lean into the assets. But if all you do is lean into the assets, how do you get to the change that you're supposed to be?
That's right. And I think too, it's funny because I was having a conversation with my wife about this, where these districts, we roll out new curriculums and do all these things, but yet the data still says what it says. And I said, that tells me that there's also an efficacy piece and a belief side to what we do.
Yeah.
Because you could put materials in anybody's hands, but they don't have a belief in themselves and in the kids that they're teaching, like a true belief.
Nothing
moves.
Nothing moves.
And think about this, is that what we believe determines how we plan.
Yes.
The interventions that we're willing to try, how far we're willing to go with a kid, is all based on what I believe about me and about them.
That's right. That efficacy piece is huge.
It's huge.
That efficacy piece is huge. And we often mistake educators, and again, for me, and educators when at all those levels, right?
Yes.
We mistake their resistance. And we misunderstand it because a lot of times their resistance, that power protecting elements that we see them enact, that really is about their understanding of their own lack. And it's masking.
That totally. Yeah. And I think it comes out and it manifests itself in different ways in different people. Sometimes it comes off as defensive.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, I don't know that I believe that I could do this.
Right. I can't do this. And so I'm going to protect myself.
Yes.
Right. I'm going to lean into my position as the leader in said building, said classroom, said whatever. I'm going to lean into my position, and I'm going to keep ownership of the current work that I have. Right. So I'm going to do that PO and the W, but my environment and my relationships are always going to stay in that stasis where I am privileged. My comfort is privileged, but it's masking a person's lack of self-confidence.
That's right.
And so they power protect on that side. And you've seen that work all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And at some point, and I love where this is going, is at some point, your words and your actions have to align.
At some
Like
point,
I said,
imagine that.
your good intentions have to meet some real action.
They have
Because
to
otherwise,
meet
your good intentions ain't getting the kid a second piece of paper.
They're not.
Like we need good intentions matched with intentional actions that actually move the needle.
Right. Right. And I want us to do more than move needles, right? Like I wish we could move more than needles, but it seems like we're settling for the smallest, most incremental changes. How do we, think about my own grandson, my own children, I'm not worried about my grandson, right? Because my daughter calls up and is like, hey, mom, I need XYZ. Who do you know? That's a phone call. It's an email. It's a text. It's like, hey, Dwayne, what about this? Hey, Mary, what about that? Like we have a bubble of resources. But I'm talking about the other kids whose parents don't have that bubble of resources.
Yeah.
How can we get beyond? How can we use our power? And one thing we were talking about before we even got to here, he said, you know what? I want to have people talk about the power they do have.
That's right.
How do we get people to use the power they do have so that we can get more than just the most incremental of changes? What's the power in that?
I think part of that is helping people understand that the impact they do make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think conceptually people hear it all the time, but I don't know that people truly understand the gravity of like an interaction every day with a kid. And I think about the small interactions that I had with certain teachers are 100% why I am where I am today.
Yep.
And I think sometimes little things like greeting kids at doors and knowing their names, things that sometimes we overlook, but they all shape experience. Like schooling is also a social experiment. Right?
That is literally is one of the opening statements of my book, that school is society's teacher.
Yes. So what I'm saying is we sometimes, I think, undersell and underscore the fact that kids are building a social identity.
They sure are.
When they're learning from you. Mm-hmm. So every interaction matters, but I think sometimes when we maybe cut the kid that look, or we're impatient, or we show that inconsistency, we're actually building something else that we're not trying to build within them.
Right.
And we're helping shape their identity. So we got to understand there's power. And there's a question I used to ask my staff: how long does it take to destroy the life of a child?
Oh my gosh.
1 second. A look, a nanosecond. I said, so everything you do every single day matters that much, because you can change the life of a child through a smile, through a comment that's snarky. You can do a lot of different things, but we got to understand when we show up, we're there and we're making a difference, whether you know it or not.
Right. Exactly right. When you show, that incremental, there's a book out. It's a business book actually, but it's years old. And I read it when I was working in retail. It's called The Moment of Truth. Every single, and this is basically, I used it because I was in retail. And so, every time a client passes your pathway, they cross paths with you. That is a moment of truth. It is a moment of truth that you're going to have with that client, with that person who's going to buy that glove, buy that whatever, right?
Yes.
But if we took the concept of a moment of truth with a kid, every single time you cross paths with a student is a moment of truth. But here's the other thing. Let's bring it up a level. Every time as a leader, you pass an educator in your building, it is a moment of truth. Every time.
But to your point though, but imagine if everybody walked with that firm belief that every single thing I do is an opportunity, versus there's just moments that get away from us, right? Moments that just passes by. What if we actually understood that if we became more intentional with our actions and with our movements every day, we would get that much further?
That's that power. That's that real power, because you're looking at your position, right? If I understood my position,
that's right.
I understood what my position is all about. And I looked at the scope of ownership. One of the questions when you heard me ask the question to your students the other day, did your decisions, the decisions you own, did they create thinking? Did they create compliance? Did they create silence or something else? What if we took that? That's part of that power dynamic, right? How we understand the impact of our decisions and what we quote unquote open space for.
Yeah.
We really, really want to do that. So, but every week, this has been fantastic. Every week we do power moves. So let's get into our power moves for this week. Power move number one: define the outcomes you are trying to change. So if you are a leader and you are thinking you're coming to the end of the school year, maybe your school year is already over, and you've done some reflecting on the dynamics of power, the way in which you saw equity or inequity in your building, how people were treated, the adults and the kids. I want you to think through this first power move before you start putting pen to paper to your growth plans for next year or your upcoming, whatever your district calls it, your plans for your 60, 30, 30, 60, 90 days. All the plans we got to make. I want you to define the outcomes you want to change. Perhaps you notice something. What that looks like is identifying specific student outcomes that require attention. Of course, it's going to be academic outcomes. Push yourself to go further than that. Examining patterns across achievement, discipline, attendance, access, and belonging, establishing a shared understanding of what equitable outcomes look like for students. What are your thoughts about that?
So that last one I think is just spot on. Just that understanding of equitable outcomes, what they look like for students. And I go back to that whole like beginning with the end in mind, right? Or backwards, and aligning every action to that desired outcome. I think that is so true. And actually, while you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind is that part of this us being successful is changing adult behaviors, not just focusing on student outcomes. We also need adult outcomes to change.
You know what? That's super important. Maybe that's another power move, right? Like what really defining, and you are so right, Dr. Chism. Because this is supposed to be about the kids, we lean into the kids, but nothing happens to the kids in school absent an adult.
That's right.
So, what are the adult change outcomes that we're looking for? Define those too. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you have to break that down because that's part of the success, right? Like I got to understand what's my role and how do I need to show up every single day intentionally to make sure that we talk about those uninviting and inviting teachers, right? Like so you got to understand which one is it that you are and who is it that you want to be and what do your actions communicate.
Right. And what's the distance between the inviting? I think I'm inviting.
That's
but
right.
If I stepped back and I look at it, I know you've got exercises in your book. I've got them in my book. Oh, wait, folks. Wait, reminder, hit that like and subscribe button right now. But anywho, you've got, exercises, real exercises in your book, and I've got them in mine where people really have structures to step back and look at their environment to say, I think I am an inviting teacher. But when I look at this and I hear this, I'm actually an uninviting teacher. Like, I really had to struggle because I was a power protecting adult. I came out of an environment that was very tight. It was that way, and so that idea, you just raised a great point. So we're going to have to talk about that power move the next time. Here's power move number 2. Embrace productive discomfort. Examining policies and practices that may unintentionally create barriers for students. And now you got me thinking about and adults.
That's right.
And adults, right? Engaging staff in honest conversations about outcomes rather than intentions. Because you're right, that road to hell is paved with good intentions. And then lastly, investigating where power, access, and opportunity are concentrated within the system. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think just the embracing discomfort is critical. Like being willing, like we used to think that being truthful wasn't the same type of thing that we need to leverage anymore. But when we don't tell adults the truth, we lie to children.
Oh my! Wait! When we don't tell adults the truth, we lie to children. Wow.
All right, so when we're not willing to tell adults things that are going to make them be better and do better for our kids, we're actually lying to kids when we tell them that their future matters. We're lying to kids when we tell them we think you can be somewhere someday. So part of this embracing discomfort is understanding that the only way to have true growth is I have to get a little uncomfortable, because we get stretched in those tough places. We don't get stretched when everything feels like it's going
That's
perfectly.
right.
So
That's right.
that's what we have to embrace, is being stretched.
I love it. Embrace. And I think, it makes me think about when you are exercising, right?
Right.
If you have not exercised in a while, you go to the gym, the first couple of days, it's going to hurt. That's the stretching part.
That's right.
Right. And so what do we do about that? Right. We don't quit. We get our muscles moving and we train our muscles to adapt to that new weight we're putting on them. But it comes through discomfort. I was listening to something this morning and this idea came to me that says, you've got to go through in order to get to.
Woo! I like that. I like that. That is really good. I like that.
You gonna creatively borrow it?
Look, I'm gonna write that down after we get
Write
off.
it down, right?
I'm gonna write that down.
You got to go through in order to get to something, right?
Sermon. I like that. That's
yeah.
good.
And here's our last power move. Build systems that support what you value. Aligning improvement efforts around a small number of clear priorities. Embedding equity conversations into curriculum, instruction, discipline, and student support decisions. Monitoring implementation and adjusting practices based on evidence rather than intentions. Evidence rather than intentions.
So what I talk about this is that everyone has missions and visions, but seldom do they actually work and do what we say we're doing on paper. So we've got to get to a point where the words that we write and the things that we put in front of our people actually have actions tied to them and a real deliverable. So how are we monitoring for those outcomes? How are we being really clear about our evidence? So that all starts with just one, being clear that we're creating coherence around what we say we believe and what's at our core.
Yeah, that coherence. And TNTP just came out with coherence at scale, brand new report. So this idea of coherence, and I'm working with a school district and they're working on coherence as well. And my question is to them, coherence around what?
That's right.
Because we think we all know it's coherence. Okay. Around what?
That's right.
And what does coherence look like when you've got the coherence that you're looking for? And you're, aligning the systems to the values we actually have. We know what people say their values are. We're clear about that. We know what they're going to say. But the truth is, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I think you're right. But I think it's the values, not that we think we should have, but the values because I think we're really good at shooting out the values. Like we love all kids. We do all this and that. But we got to get real about what's our current local and immediate reality. And how do we actually paint a better picture for where we currently sit?
That's right. Because there's a huge value and actuality gap, right? It's the stated values and it's the actual values. And there is a gap between the two. And it's coming out in these outcomes. These outcomes nobody wants, right?
Nobody wants.
We don't want these outcomes, and yet they persist. We can go in any school in this country and we say, okay, give me your top 7 most disciplined students. We already know what they'll look like.
We already know.
Give me your lowest performing group of students. We already know.
Yeah.
And yet we love kids. We think every kid can succeed. So how do we get past, like, to me, that's that instructional power in there, right? It's the leader power, it's the instructional power that we are trained to say a thing.
Yep.
But then we enact its opposite.
I think we have to learn to stop leaning on the excuses of, and I'm not saying these things don't matter, but poverty, single parent home. Like I think we lean on these things as almost a way out, versus understanding that there's many people that grow up in those conditions and they're doing just fine. So we have to stop using that as a crux, or a reason to explain away why the data says what it says.
Right.
When truth be told, when our kids share schools with other kids and all of those factors are even, there's still a gap.
There's still a gap. Right. As a Black child, you're going to graduate high school with 4 less years of education.
That's right. So
Right?
we
You're
got
going
to
to
do something
graduate as an
different.
eighth grader as opposed to a 12th grader. Oh yeah, and we equate economic levels with intellect.
Now
The
you,
two aren't not they
we do. That is so true. And so we have to learn to get out of our own way.
right in order to disrupt because if these are the outcomes we know and we say we don't want them. Nobody wants these NAEP scores that have been stagnant. Nobody wants, persistent absenteeism that is within the control, right? There are some forms of absenteeism schools can't do anything about. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about those. I'm talking about the actual ones that schools can influence. I'm talking about discipline referrals that can be, if we took a different approach to discipline, that might change. I'm
Yeah.
talking about that. We keep equating things that are not equal.
I think when something matters to you, you move. And
Ooh, that's true.
I think when something really, really matters to you, you move.
You
So
do.
if we keep saying we want to change, but then when someone brings up an idea, tells you something radical that you can do, and you're not willing to do it, how bad do you want that change?
Right.
So to
That's
me,
right.
we got to get beyond lip service. And if we're really, when the data really begins to matter in a way that we personalize it, that it's on
Yeah.
us, you
Right.
move differently.
We move differently
You move differently.
Right. When you personalize it, that's right. When you can say these are our kids,
That's right.
these are my students, right? Then we get to see it differently.
That's right. And, and,
Wow.
we're, and we're not pointing fingers, right? We're actually having a collective efficacy working together. It's just different, you know?
Yeah,
And so I think we say a lot of things and we think a lot of things, but our behaviors and our actions don't back up what we
they
say
don't.
we desire and what we say our schools are even built for.
That's right.
So to
That's
me,
right.
let's just get real and I don't think the words need to change. I think the attitude and the approach needs to change because
Right.
the words.
The words are the words, right? The words have only meaning that they've got is the actions that support them or don't.
That's right.
Right. That's the truth right there. Our words, and we are so trained, it's ingrained in the mind and the mouth of an educator to say, I believe every kid can learn. And yet we see access to opportunity gaps persisting in some spaces, enlarging. We see, gaps between I don't feel like I belong here widening, particularly as kids get older and go further into school. We see discipline disparity rates constantly unequal and out of balance. We see all of that. And so we've got to, if these are the outcomes that no one wants and they persist, then we've got those three power moves that we've got to really be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna keep just lifting up your work around power because I think we have to start understanding what we do possess,
Yeah.
and we can't excuse it, right? Like you got
No.
it. You by being an educator, you've got power.
Right.
There's no I'm only one person or I'm only this. No, you've got it. So now you have to figure out what's the appropriate and morally responsible way to execute it.
Ooh, more the appropriate and morally. I'm gonna write that down. And right, I'm gonna write that down. That right, the appropriate and morally responsible way to use it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. And on that note, Dr. Chism, look, y'all, we're going to be in Orlando. Both of us are going to be presenting at the ASCD SD conference. Dwayne, you are presenting on Monday, the 29th.
Yep.
At 12:30. I am presenting on Wednesday, July 1st at 8:30 in the morning. We would love to see you there if you are going to the ASCD. Last reminder for the show, folks, remember QR code and link to the Messy Middle article series. And that is our show for today. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Remember to hit the like, subscribe, and share button and notifications. And we will see you next week at 5:30 for another episode episode session, whatever you want to call it, of Let's Talk Power Live. Dr. Chism, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, sir. Have a good one, everybody.